Hey, welcome back to Swarzo History. We're on episode 6, and we're talking about the plague, and again, we have Thucydides as our source for pretty much everything that happens during the Peloponnesian War. So, the plague is about the plague that hit Athens near the start of the Peloponnesian War, and Thucydides says it's in the second year of the war, in the summer, when Sparta leads an invasion into Attica against Athens. So, convenient, Sparta invades Attica, a plague hits the city of Athens. They have to deal with both at the same time. And about the plague itself, Thucydides offers what some common people thought about where the plague came from, but he himself says that he has no intention of making any claims about where the plague came from because he doesn't know, and he says he's going to leave that to other writers who know more about it than him. But what he does is he goes into detail about what the plague was like, what it did to people, and what it did to Athens specifically. It's probably important to note that Thucydides himself actually had the plague and survived it. So Thucydides starts out with kind of a list of symptoms, and it's a pretty big list, ranging from like burning head sensations to like bleeding throats to breathing problems, and it moves on to chest pain and coughing and vomiting of every kind of bile that has been given a name by the medical profession. And one thing he talks about is people getting the feeling that they're so hot and burning up that they just can't stand to wear clothes, and people who are neglected end up going and plunging into the water tanks to try and cool off and quench like insatiable thirst that persists in the sick people. And he says that if people lasted more than 8 days, that the disease devolved into like severe diarrhea that wiped people out. And the disease had long-term effects as well. He says some people went blind, some people had severe memory issues, and a lot of people lost the ability to use their limbs. All of this is really secondary to what he sees as a bigger problem, which is the effect that the plague had on the society itself. So, the suffering for individuals was, he claims, beyond the capacity of human nature to endure, and there were dead people lying everywhere, like, even the animals that were usually associated with coming and eating the scraps and dead bodies and stuff would leave the diseased dead people alone, because they would get sick and die too. And he says the most terrible thing of all was the despair that people fell into when they found out they caught the plague, because they would immediately adopt this hopeless attitude that made it hard to fight the plague and caused a lot of societal problems as well. So, among the good happening, which would be the people who feel honor-bound to go help the sick and dying, instead of just leaving them to rot and suffer, there was a big problem with lawlessness and impiety in the city. So if you survived the illness, according to Thucydides, you were most likely immune from it, and you felt kind of better, and like you were able to go help people. But a lot of people didn't survive it, and the general impression among the population was if you got it, you were done. And it led to a catastrophe where he says that it was so overwhelming that people just became indifferent to every religious custom and law imaginable. Burial practices suffered, where like there were so many dead people that instead of building pyres for everybody, families would just walk up on someone else's funeral pyre and throw their own family members' bodies on it. People saw how rich and poor people suffered the same. So there was no qualms about just spending your money on ridiculous stuff and just living in the moment for whatever you wanted at that particular time. And he says, as for what is called honor, no one showed himself willing to abide by its laws. There is no fear of God or law of man that had a restraining influence. And as for the gods, it seemed to be the same thing whether one worshipped them or not. Basically, nobody saw the gods doing any good. If people who prayed and people who didn't pray ended up dead. And nobody really expected to live long enough to pay for any crimes they might commit, so they just committed them anyway. And as usual with stories in Thucydides and Herodotus, there's an oracle involved. But I like Thucydides because he's very skeptical of oracles. So the oracle in this instance is one that said, war with the Dorians comes, Dorians being Spartans, and a death or dearth, they couldn't figure out what it was at the time, will come at the same time. And Thucydides makes a comment that obviously people in the situation decided, oh, death fits the situation better, so they rolled with that prophecy. And he says that if a dearth had come instead of the plague, then they would have just ran with the other version. And in the context of the war, the Spartans actually didn't really get affected by the plague at all. So they had this really successful invasion where they basically laid waste the land of Attica for about 40 days, and then when they heard about the plague going on in Athens, and they saw all the funeral pyres and stuff, they just kind of were like, oh, we don't want to go near that. And they just backed out. And of course, the war was still going on, so the Athenians were still sending out military expeditions because there was a larger war happening. They had some sieges going on in other places, like Potidaea. So they were sending ships full of plague-ridden soldiers to go to these garrisons of men who had not been in contact with the plague yet. You can guess how that went. So the plague spread a little bit more among Athenian forces outside of Athens itself. And thousands of soldiers ended up dying from it too. So in the end, this whole plague and invasion simultaneously happening just demoralized the entire city of Athens. They invaded and hit with plague at the same time while their enemies were basically untouched. And they obviously blamed whoever was in charge, which was Pericles at the time. And then later, when Pericles ends up dying, we get things like the Mitolenian Debate, which we talked about in the last episode. This happened, the plague happened a little bit before the Mitolenian Debate. So the plague, I kind of see as a big turning point in the whole disposition of Athens and its empire, from being kind of on the fence about what they're doing to kind of sliding down a slippery slope to being brutal. And we saw in the Mitolenian Debate that there was still some hope for a nice, just Athenian empire, but we'll see in the next few episodes that it doesn't really work out that way. So the instrumental portion of the plague was actually written second right after Odyssey. It just didn't have lyrics or the plague as the subject yet. And it was originally going to be about something else, which I might make another song about in the future, but I felt like the song ended up fitting this topic a lot better. The pandemic was definitely happening by the time I was writing lyrics and recording them, so it definitely made its way into the song. But I think even though COVID is nowhere near the same as the plague that hit Athens, according to Thucydides, and I'm very happy about that, it's still a very relatable story now, experiencing a lot of the chaos and confusion surrounding COVID. Like, I can only imagine how much worse things could have been if things got so bad during this pandemic that we're experiencing now. And I will happily say thank whoever you want to thank for modern medicine, because it's really, in Thucydides' story, that's a big part of the problem, is they did not know what to do. And even their state-of-the-art at the time medical professionals didn't know what to do about this. So, as you know, I will be doing another Swarzo history because there are still some songs left on the Odyssey album that I haven't covered yet. And the next song in the list is Might Makes Right, and that one is kind of the exact opposite of Mitolenian. So be ready for that. Also, since releasing the Mitolenian video, I've released another single as well, and the new single is called Arnhem, and it has nothing to do with ancient Greece at all. So we're finally branching out into other areas of history, and I'm very excited about that. So if you haven't already, I would really appreciate it if you would go check out any of my music at this point. Any of the songs that I've talked about in this series, Arnhem is my newest one, and I'm very happy with that one. I'm very proud of it. And I have more songs coming up. I don't know exactly what they're going to be about yet, but we've got instrumental stuff in the works. So if you enjoy these videos and you want them to keep happening, they're probably going to keep happening anyway because I have the time and I need to build an audience, and the best way to do that is to get my face in a lot of different places to talk about my music. But it will hopefully reach more eyes and ears if people like you who watch these videos would subscribe, share, like, you know, all the things that other YouTubers harass you to do every time you watch one of their videos. I don't like to do that, but I'm doing it now. So I will see you next time, hopefully in a week, maybe 2 weeks, with another episode of Swarzo History about Might Makes Right.